Welcome to the final round of the Wyoming Farm Bureau Young Farmer Rancher discussion meeting. I'm Cole Coxwell from Huntley, Wyoming. Chelsea Cordes will be serving as your moderator for this round. I will be also serving as timekeeper for this round. This round allows contestants to be judged on the discussion of one of the 5 topics. The top 4 contestants of the 2 preliminary rounds discussed will be our winner. Please turn off and silence all your cell phones at this time. The topic for this round: how can we ensure that farmers and ranchers, not government agencies, are driving the management of natural resources? The judges, timekeeper, and contestants have been briefed of the rules of the contest. I will now turn the contest back to your moderator, Ms. Cordes.
Thanks, Cole. We appreciate you taking your time to attend this contest. Your support is appreciated by the contestants. Contestants, if you guys would now come forward and take your spots up front. As our room chairman has mentioned, the contestants have been briefed on the contest and realize that their general discussion should be directed at each other rather than at the audience. In my role as the moderator, I will not attempt to control or direct this discussion. Remember, the discussion is meant to simulate a committee meeting, not a panel discussion with points, counterpoints, and an active moderator. As such, I will not intervene unless or until disparaging or inappropriate remarks are made. With that in mind, the burden is on the contestants to moderate themselves and conduct themselves in a cooperative and congenial manner. The contestants for this round are Renelle Taylor, Stacy Berger, Dakota Ray Brown, Rachel Durner, and Chelsea Bars. We will begin this discussion with a 30-second opening statement for each contestant. Following the opening statements will be 15 minutes of open discussion, followed by 1 minute of quiet time for the contestants to prepare for their 1-minute closing statement. And the official time is kept by Cole. Contestants, you may now, in voluntary order, make your 30-second opening statements. Please stand and direct your opening statements to the audience. Cole will indicate when your 30 seconds have elapsed by holding up his time card.
Farmers and ranchers are natural stewards of the land. We care about the land, we care about the water, we care about all of the natural resources. We want that land and water to be viable for the next generation and generations to come. So management of natural resources definitely needs to be moved to the farmers and the ranchers who care the most about those natural resources.
Natural resources are inarguably valuable, otherwise we wouldn't even be having this discussion. The diversity of natural resources means that these cannot be controlled at the federal level. Other states simply don't understand the resources that we have here in Wyoming. The best management practices for these natural resources should be left to each individual landowner because they have a vested interest in maintaining those resources so they remain viable for generations to come. No one would be more hurt by loss of natural resources than farmers and ranchers.
While I have no doubt that everybody here would agree that farmers and ranchers would be the ideal people to handle the management of natural resources, I think we can all also state the obvious. The government doesn't want us to do that. It would be so hard to take this power back from the government. So one way that we could cope with this is by having everything go from the federal level to the state level and having a committee of people that have a background in agriculture helping to manage the resources and working with landowners to have the best management plan for each individual person.
Our natural resources are such a precious treasure here in the state of Wyoming, and no one knows better how to use those natural resources than the farmers and ranchers who use them on a daily basis. When the federal government formulates policy and regulations controlling our natural resources, they use statistics that are collected from all across the nations. And their policy is supposed to be a one-size-fits-all that works for everyone, east to west coast. And that simply doesn't work here in the state of Wyoming. So I think it is crucial now more than ever that the control of our natural resources is in the hands of the farmers and ranchers.
The government has definitely overreached in this area, and we have to make sure that in the state of Wyoming, we can keep our natural resources where they can be advantageous to us in keeping the success of agriculture and feeding the world. That is our responsibility in our own hands. As we move forward, relationships with the different environmental agencies, with our government and the different departments that they have are going to be imperative. Many of these departments were created for a specific purpose that have done that purpose and need to be abolished. I'm looking forward to discussing this today.
You have heard the opening statements. The contestants may now proceed with the discussion. Contestants, please direct your discussion to your fellow panel members.
It sounds like the consensus is that we all believe that the management of natural resources needs to go back to the farmers and ranchers. But whether it's realistic or not, we don't know at this point. But one thing that Stacy mentioned that I really want to touch on is she said environmental relationships. And it's not just environmental relationships in general, it's all relationships in general that I kind of like to visit about. And one of the, I guess, most important relationships we can as far as getting the management of natural resources back to the state level, like Dakota had mentioned, is having those relationships with our elected officials, our senators and our representatives. And I think those relationships are going to help to move that management of natural resources at least back to the state level, if not back to the farmers and ranchers who care. Do you have anything to maybe add to that, Dakota?
I definitely think that's really important, especially here in Wyoming, because our elected officials, most of them do have at least some knowledge of agriculture. And so I think one thing, though, that we need to consider is not all of the natural resources are necessarily like land and water that ranchers and farmers are using on an everyday basis. And so when it comes down to it, like, we may not be the best source of managing things like coal mines and uranium mines and other natural resources. So thinking about not just having an overstated blanket for everything is something we should definitely be considering.
I definitely agree with you. I don't think that farmers and ranchers should necessarily manage specifically all natural resources, but more specifically the resources that we deal with on an everyday basis. That makes my comment.
Okay, I definitely agree with you on that.
Stacey, I had a question about something you said in your opening statement. You talked about abolishing government agencies that have served their purpose. Yesterday we heard from our representative that government agencies are already being illegally funded and they have tried to accomplish this. So what steps do you see that we can take that the government hasn't already tried to take?
Rachel, thank you so much for asking. I think some of the steps that we did take was showing up to vote. And with our new administration, we are going to be able to get some of these things done. I mean, it is a good day in agriculture to be able to get some of those groups that were created for a specific purpose, that have served that purpose and need to end. For example, the Forest Service was one that was created, and they were actually created to provide food, fiber, and fuel for the United States citizens. And as far as that goes, that's not what they do. And we need to really not only abolish the ones that have accomplished their purposes, but also make sure that they understand what their job is as their agency, what they are responsible for, and what they need to not have their hand in. And I think that's something that we can do working with our officials, but moving forward. And one thing I wanted to comment a little bit about is farmers and ranchers absolutely do not need to be managing every aspect of our natural resources. That would be way too much for us to be able to do. But the things that we have our hand in every day, things such as the land that we have in our control, and the grazing, being able to graze on that land and make sure that we are managing it to the best of our ability and to the best capacity of the land, because we are concerned with the stewardship of that land and how we can preserve that for future generations. And so as we move forward, I also would like to talk about water as one of our natural resources. So we want to move on to something that maybe we've touched on some of the different things and how we can transfer management, possibly what we do not need to be managing and how we can abolish. But maybe talk about water as one of our resources that is so essential to production agriculture.
I have to completely water is, especially, it seems to be depleting as farmers and ranchers are forced to use more water on such a small land space. Less than 10% of our land space in America is used in production ag. And so we need to use those resources, but we also need to make sure we preserve them for the future generations to come. It goes back to, just the simple laws of nature that not everything is always going to increase in production, that everything kind of degrades. So we need to be such good stewards of the land and preserve those resources. And I think originally our government agencies were formed with the intent of protecting them and using them in a way that's supposed to be valuable. However, over the years, those agencies have become more corrupt and have wandered from the original views that they may have once had at one point in time. And so I think that's where Farm Bureau can step in, and as they continue, they do this already, but this is where Farm Bureau can continue to step in and come up with policies and bring those to our agencies and to our elected officials with solutions as to why we think these are such important resources and why we think that while we agree that these need to be preserved, they also need to be utilized so we can feed and clothe the world.
Chelsea, I think you make a great point that we need to use these resources, but one thing that we also have to consider is that the federal government makes it very hard to use these resources with, the burden of federal overreach. I mean, we have rules like Waters of the U.S. that we've been dealing with that is so significant, and the biggest thing about that is they don't know how to manage that water. They just don't know, and that's why it's so significantly important that we get it back to the local level, or at least to a state level, because we are the ones that know how to use that water.
I think water is the perfect resource to use to get back to the one thing that we all have in common. We care about these resources. There's no better way to express your concern for something than to take it back to family values. The ultimate goal of both the government agencies and the farmers and ranchers is to make sure that future generations can be sustainable. And I think that we need to the best of our ability, avoid seeing these government agencies as enemies, because ultimately we all have the same goal, which is to continue to maintain this resource. And I think that once we all can sit down and have a dinner table conversation about family values and about continually making sure that these resources are viable, we'll be a lot more successful than in butting heads.
I definitely think that this is very important, having the family values brought up. Like, that's where this all comes back to, is we feel that we would be the best management plan for the natural resources that we use on an everyday basis. And so while we can all agree on that, now we have to figure out how we bring that back to us and not the government.
So the great point that you made was back to family values, and I know that Stacy can definitely attest to the same thing that I'm probably about to say, but both of us have children, and we want that next generation to have viable resources, such as the water and the land. We want them to be able to produce, to raise livestock, produce crops, whatever type of agriculture you're in, we want that to be viable. So if we can utilize stories such as our family values, per se, with our families, that maybe that would be a good way to persuade back to the state level.
So on something, I agree that, the stories is something that's really helpful, and tying that together with something that Rachel said about the dinner table conversation. One of my favorite stories is of my host mom talking about how she remembers being my age and younger, and it wasn't some unknown BLM person that came and told them how many head of cattle they could have grazing. It was somebody coming and having coffee with her dad at the dining room table, and the agency wasn't seen so much as a bad thing, but much more as somebody that they could talk to, because it was somebody that they had known their entire lives and growing up, and that person also wanted the best thing for the land. And so not seeing the agencies as something evil or as enemies is definitely a very valid point. But right now we have it to the point where nobody on the local level necessarily wants to be making these decisions. And so it gets passed on, and it ends up at the federal level where somebody's making the decision that's never seen the land. So bring bringing it back to how we actually get this management under ours, I think the first thing we need to be doing is bringing it back to the state level, because things are a lot easier to get back down to the grassroots if we are at least at the state level.
To go to that is, and I know that there is definitely a push to have the transfer, a movement to transfer power back to the states. And that is something that I feel like in the state of Wyoming can do a very good job managing our natural resources. We had the opportunity to do that. And I know Governor Meade had a governor's area strategy where he would have advisors that could help him make the best decisions for certain aspects of our natural resources. And when you're able to have a group that is full of knowledge, that's on the state level, that is where we're going to get something accomplished. That's where action is going to come into place. And I know that our governor is very adamant about our natural resources, and that's what's exciting too for us. We will be able to make some changes because of this and his initiative with the governor's area strategy to be able to have that local group of close advisors who knows what is best for the state of Wyoming. So this movement to transfer ownership and management to the states is something that we're going to rely on heavily for changes.
And as Stacy said earlier, showing up to vote. And if we wouldn't have showed up to vote, for those of us that are in voting age, we wouldn't have a governor that knows about our natural resources. And I think that when Stacy talks about showing up to vote, I think that is so important. Because if we don't do our job to try and elect the officials that we think can best represent us at the state level, then we're not doing our job as farmers and ranchers.
And I think both Stacy and Renelle, you make great points that the state is a great resource for handling our natural resources. However, the one point I would like to make is that handling our natural resources in Ivory County aren't the same as they are down here in Albany County. And handling them here aren't the same as up in Johnson County or wherever. And so I think that the state is a great resource, and having that board of local people to influence how the state handles things is a great way to go about it. But I think also a great way of doing it is having those local people really control kind of their own resources. And there are those things like your water conservation district boards and things like that. And you have to be a little bit careful there. They can have their overreach too, but we also need to work on having it more in the hands of the local people, because even across the state, we see such a wide variety of climatic differences.
Chelsea, yes, thank you for bringing that up. That's absolutely true. And I know that as far as having, with our public lands, ranchers are the ones who are dealing with this on a daily basis with their cattle grazing. And I think that a lot of the country is seeing the effects of not allowing grazing with their forest fires. That's one of the best management tools that we can use as far as controlling wildfires. And I think that having that be a tool that can be in farmers and ranchers' hands, and starting with our state and showing them how effective we could be as managers at the local level, I think is where it's really gonna make a difference if we can convince them and show them how we can manage those public lands with our grazing techniques.
Just to kind of expand on something that you said, Chelsea, although we have these differences across our county, our different counties, the differences between our states are even bigger. People in New Jersey should not be having a decision in the way that we handle our resources in Wyoming. That being said, we're not the only state facing this issue. Though we have an abundance of natural resources, other states are also having issues managing their natural resources. So a way that I think we could take action on this problem is to, as a state, develop our own policy to show the federal government that we are willing and able to take control of these resources. Because if each state could develop their own policy, I think it would be a lot easier to convince the federal government to let go of their control once they see how capable we are and how invested we are in these natural resources and their management.
So Rachel, I think you made a great statement that we need to find a way to take action. So I think this is a great transition for us, is finding an action plan per se. And you said that we should try and develop our own policy so that we can manage our own natural resources. So do you or any of the other panelists have any suggestions on what we should add to that policy?
I know that in the state of Wyoming, feral horses have been something that is of concern even, people that are on our Young Farmers and Ranchers State Committee is a huge concern. It started out, they wanted to be able to have about 17,000 wild horses to preserve the fantasy of the wild horse. And as it stands now, there's around 120,000 feral horses. And this just the amount of feed that they are consuming is a big problem here in the state of Wyoming. So as far as policy development goes, I feel like that should be a part of our policy. And I know that the government will pay for people to run these wild horses. And sometimes that's more attractive to people than even having to bring in cattle and take care of cattle. So we need to make sure that our policy is talking about those feral horses, as well as mentioning the waters of the U.S. rule, because water is one of our most valuable resources. Our grazing, that policy should include something with our grazing.
Contestants, you have 5 minutes of open discussion remaining.
So I'd like to hear what you guys think that policy should include.
I think before we even start on the policy, we have to take one step back and form some coalitions. Because I have no business writing a policy on coal. I have no interest in that outside of that it's a state natural resource. I think that we need to get the stakeholders with each of these natural resources together, because you have different issues in each different industry, and we'll be more successful if we focus on the things that we know more about and have a personal interest in.
So in regards to that, technically we have a per se coalition or organization such as the Wyoming Farm Bureau that does a great job of having that form of farmers and ranchers that get together that can help develop that policy. And this question most specifically talks about farmers and ranchers. So I don't know that we necessarily need to take a step back as far as whether we try to form coalitions for the other resources. In this specific question, we're still kind of trying to manage the natural resources for the farmers and ranchers. So I would like to hear if Dakota has any additions for our action plan.
So I think something that would be really helpful with writing a policy is to actually have gone through and done some steps in managing these natural resources on our own, because from there, then it's going to be a whole lot easier to write a policy that is actually already in effect and is working. And so going back on something I said in my opening statement, I think it would be really, really helpful to have a committee of people that have a background and a knowledge of agriculture, because these are the people that are going to have agriculture in their best interest and in everybody's best interest, because these are people that have the invested interest in it. I understand farmers and ranchers, we've got our operations that we need to be working on, and so it's really hard to do that. But even somebody that just has a background in it that doesn't necessarily have an operation that they need to run, having a committee of those to go and work with farmers and ranchers side by side would be very helpful in my opinion.
So are you saying you want elected officials to work with this committee? Or, because we have a whole committee right here, farmers and ranchers that took the time to come off their farms and ranches to fight for our rights for policy, and so I guess I'm a little bit confused as far as developing another committee of farmers and ranchers when we have this entire room full.
What I love about this here, though, is they've taken time out of their very busy schedules to do this, and they left their operations for a certain amount of time to come to this. And so having a designated committee that is specifically for working with farmers and ranchers to manage the natural resources, putting the trust in the farmers and ranchers, but then just kind of being kept in the loop on what's going on would be helpful. And then it still gives our farmers and ranchers the time that they need to run their operations.
I think you all make valid points, and I have to agree with you, Dakota, that from what I'm kind of deriving from it, I'm taking from it that as we use on our students in it at college, we need to lead by example. And by leading by example, we need to have a positive influence and take the right steps to take management of our natural resources. When we start at, just for our student senate, for example, when the officers who are from a very diverse group of people take a step and do it in a positive light, and we do it for the betterment of the school, we influence those around us. And so I think we can do the same as farmers and ranchers, that by taking the positive step and influencing those who may not necessarily be the best stewards of the land influencing them to better handle our natural resources, then we can start to formulate the policy that we can take to our state level to preserve those natural resources.
We currently have 2 ranchers in prison because of the federal lands issue. So this is something that we have got to act fast. And I know sometimes comments can be very helpful, but sometimes comments need to be printed off on toilet paper and used as garbage, because that is sometimes not going to be effective. Some comments there's a time and place for comments, but sometimes there has to be action taken. One that comes to mind is when we were in Washington, D.C., farmers and ranchers drove tractors, I think it was in the 50s or 60s, and they were protesting about something that was going on. And now with our new administration, hopefully we will be able to get something done. I was thinking if Hillary would have gotten in her administration, we would have had to do something drastic, like take horses and everyone just flood the streets of Washington, D.C. until we could actually see something get accomplished.
Time has been called. Please prepare your closing statements. I ask that the audience remain silent for 1 minute to aid the contestants in their preparation. Please put down your pens and in voluntary order, please stand and give your 1 minute closing statement.
As a 5th generation rancher and farmer, I care about my land. I care about my water. I am a steward of the land, and I want management of natural resources back to the farmers and ranchers who care the most. I think that we did a very great job of discussing some of the issues that go along with managing our natural resources. We definitely need to build our relationships with our elected officials. We needed to show up to vote to help build those relationships with our elected officials. And we definitely need to bring the power from the federal government back to the state government, because we don't need a one-size-fits-all solution for Wyoming agriculture. We had an action plan to try and move to develop our own policy that we can manage our own resources. And we talked about utilizing Wyoming Farm Bureau as a farming and ranching organization that will fight for our rights as farmers and ranchers to manage those natural resources.
We've definitely established that natural resources are so important, and they definitely are extremely valuable. We've also established the diverse natural resources that we have, not only across the country, but across our state. I think through our discussion, we definitely found a pathway that makes sense from the national government to state government levels in order to return the power of controlling natural resources to the hands of farmers and ranchers. I definitely liked how we talked about the basis being family values, because we're all concerned about these natural resources, no matter which side of the aisle you're on, whether you're part of a government agency or a farmer and rancher. And I think that the best way to develop this policy is to go back to forming those committees. While Farm Bureau is a great organization, we have other organizations like the soybean growers, like Wyoming stock growers, and those people have a vested interest also. So we need to start at the grassroots level and work with other organizations and other stakeholders to eliminate government overreach and become a successful farmer and rancher managed system.
We have all established that natural resources are important, and that we all believe that farmers and ranchers are the best suited to take care of the natural resources that we use on an everyday basis. Coming from not having a background in agriculture just a few years ago, I don't necessarily believe that it has to be farmers and ranchers maintaining these natural resources, because I do have a vested interest in agriculture, and I believe that having a committee of people that are just invested in the agriculture would be able to help and work with the farmers and ranchers just to maintain our natural resources as well. And so bringing everything back to a state level and working in each county on our own to manage our natural resources is a great thing, and working on those relationships with our elected officials is definitely important to what we want to do.
I thank you all for taking time to listen to us this morning, and I'd like to thank you all for your input. I think that we can all agree that the government has had an overreach of their input on our natural resources and how to control them. I think that we all agree that the natural resources need to be handled in the hands of those who know how to use them best. And that may not necessarily be just the farmers and ranchers, because like was stated, we don't necessarily all know how to handle coal mines and the feral horses and different things like that. And so it needs to be in the hands of those who know how to use them best. We also agree that it needs to start on a local level, because there are so many differences between county to county and even state to state. There's such big differences. And so if we start on the local level, same idea as Farm Bureau, start at the local level, we can work our way up through the different regions and get to that state and even national level where we can have an influence on how our natural resources are controlled.
President Livingston told a story about one of his trips to Oregon where Mount St. Helens had erupted and there was ash 6 inches deep. And on one side there was a private sector where they had dug and they had reclaimed, they had planted trees. On another side was a section managed by the government that had done nothing. There was craters in the ground. Nothing had been done with that. So as we can see, the private sector is definitely more interested in keeping our natural resources abundant and able to be used. As we went to Washington, D.C. as a group a couple years ago, we actually met with the Department of Interior. And there were about 5 of us, and they had about 15 of them come with pad and paper ready to take notes on what we had to say. So relationships is where we really are going to get something done. They do want to hear what we have to say. They don't understand production agriculture in Washington, D.C., but they are concerned with what we are dealing with. So that we have to be a voice. And American Farm Bureau has definitely been a voice for us in agriculture. They care about our future, our families, and that is our Farm Bureau.
Let's show these contestants our appreciation for a job well done.